Tom LaVecchia here with the continuation of the New Theory podcast, and the universe is growing. We did a video podcast with Dr. Bart Rossi, clinical psychologist, political psychologist, Emmy Award winner, and it did pretty well. 1,200 views on YouTube within about 48 hours, and we got a few thousand clicks to the website. But then he contributed an op-ed piece called Pathological, which we will discuss now, which will cover what he believes to be the kind of the mental state of Donald Trump coming from a professional standpoint. Dr. Bart Rossi, happy to have you again. How you doing today?
I'm good. Nice to be with you again, Tom.
All right, you're a busy guy. So the fact that you put pen to paper, hands on the keyboard to write this op-ed piece, which we'll put a link to, walk us through the crust of it and why you wrote it.
Well, I think that there's too much out there now in the public specter on Donald Trump. I mean, I can't make decisions in terms of a diagnosis because he's not been in my office. However, I can make certain determinations based on his behavior and his comments over time now. And what I see is someone who is extremely narcissistic. And the trait of a narcissistic personality is that they don't take any internal blame. Everything is externalized. They don't believe that they're responsible for any wrongdoing or that they make any mistakes. And that's what he does. He actually blames everybody else. Usually it's the media. And he's acting in a way that, in my mind, is clearly a personality disorder, not just narcissistic characteristics, but actually a disorder, which I think is very disheartening and troubling going forward.
All right. The word disorder, right? Narcissistic. These are important clinical terms, but they're strong terms. So I want to dive deep for a second. And you're my guy. You know I love you, but that's pretty ballsy too, right? To say, hey, he's narcissistic and all this other fun stuff. However, the guy's been wildly successful. So can I use the argument that he is narcissistic, that he is a dick, that he is this way, but that's what made him tough and made him a billionaire? Is there a good argument is he's there for that reason, right? And that's why he's successful. Walk us through that.
I don't think he's successful at all because he's narcissistic. There are many, many people who are successful who are not a narcissistic personality in terms of a disorder. They may have narcissistic traits. We all have ego. We all have times when maybe we think a little bit too much of ourselves. A lot of people fall in that category, especially in the business world. But Donald Trump has been successful, yes, in certain areas, but he's also been a failure in many others. And we don't even know the depth of those failures, except for some bankruptcies. There was Trump Air, there was Trump Vodka, there's Trump everything that didn't make it. We don't know about his enterprise as much as we would like to because he doesn't release his tax returns. I think they would be very interesting and would shed a lot of light on him personally as well as his career. But he's successful in spite of his own limited, shallow, I would call it, thinking and thought processes. Now, he has been successful. He had a lot of money from his father, and he had some endeavors that have worked out for him, clearly. But many have not. And I see him now on the national stage as a politician, as someone who's very ill-equipped to take on compromise, to understand other people, to listen carefully. He does not listen. He thinks only about himself and his own thoughts. He tweets and he says things in the tweets that are actually ridiculous. Obama wiretapped him. He said that Comey told him 3 different times that he was not the subject of an investigation. I don't believe that's true at all. I think that's a complete fabrication on his part. He also said he had the largest crowds in the history of inaugurations. That's clearly not true. That's fake news that he is perpetuating. And then he blames the news media for fake news. So this is a guy that is really unstable, in my view, and he's shown that he's unstable on the national stage. And that's what bothers me going forward. He's, by the way, he says he's going to solve the opiate epidemic, but his health care plan that he endorses cuts people out of getting treatment. And mental health, of course, is an Obamacare mandate that is not necessary anymore. So if you're in the field of mental health, forget about it. You're just really on the outside. Now, this is a guy that doesn't make a lot of sense when you talk about these things.
Got it. Okay, so if I'm filtering you correctly, he has some challenges, whether he's wired a certain way or developed these traits over time, where he's unilateral, doesn't take, doesn't take others' thoughts into consideration, maybe thinks of actions or maybe acts without consequence. Let's be honest, he spoke a few times, right, without thinking and got himself in hot water. So I think we're all on the same page on that, right? However, I would argue that maybe Washington needs that. Because if we get a listener, a pacifier, a super negotiator, we're just going to get the same shit. I'll be honest, I'm a registered Democrat. But I'll give you that you kind of need a guy to come in and kick a little ass. So do we kind of need somebody like that right now?
We don't need anybody like Donald Trump. If you want to make the right analogy and keep it in the GOP specter, how about Reagan, for example?
Yeah.
Reagan was a tough-minded guy. He said what he thought. He believed in himself. He was very independent-minded. And his best friend was Tip O'Neill, a Democrat. So now you have a guy in Ronald Reagan who is the epitome of greatness in the Republican Party. But here's a guy who really set the tone himself. He was his own person. He was tough-minded, but he knew how to compromise. He knew how to be a very good listener, and he made decisions that he thought was in the best interest of the country and not himself. Whether you liked him or not, that's how he operated, and that's his legacy. Donald Trump doesn't listen to anybody, doesn't care about anybody. He cares about himself and the coverage he gets, and that's a real problem. He is 180 degrees away from a Ronald Reagan. No, we do not need a Donald Trump at all. I mean, we can criticize a lot of people. And McCain would have been a good president in many respects, and he was a maverick. And you had George W. Bush, who criticizes himself today for stepping on his own words. He criticizes himself. I mean, he's very far away from Donald Trump. All of the Republicans that have been president in the past are very different than Donald Trump.
Got it. All right. So, but here's the thing. I know that he fired one of his main campaign managers almost a month before. The grab him by the pussy scandal. Sorry to use that word, but grab him by the pussy scandal. Comey. I mean, he's got a lot of challenges and a lot of big challenges that should have torpedoed either his election or at least disrupted his presidency. He's like the Teflon Don, this guy. Why?
Well, he is a Teflon guy. That is a very good point, because there is a certain sector of the American public who wants to believe in a tough guy, a populist type guy who's only thinking about America first. And a lot of these folks are not bad people. They're not crazy, but they're tired of politicians. The only thing I say is that they're misguided in thinking that Donald Trump is the guy that they think he is. He's not that guy. He's not for them. He's not for the guy who's making $40 or $50 or $90,000 a year. And he's not for health care that makes any sense. And he's not going to get the results that people want. Building a wall is ridiculous. It's never going to happen. It's just fake news on his part. So I think that there's a certain sector in this, our society that likes a tough-minded guy, what I call as a psychologist, the authoritarian personality. Okay, I get that. But this guy is too problematic to be an authoritarian personality who's effective. He is not going to be effective as we go forward. He is on a downward spiral right now. He's not a president who took office and is moving forward. I see this Russia investigation being very, very problematic for him. So I think he's going in the wrong direction right now.
Okay. All right. I'm absorbing here. I'm a blue-collar guy. I grew up in a blue-collar family, so I am blue-collar, but blue-collar guy in Pennsylvania, make, $48,000 a year. I have 2 kids. married 17 years, and have a $270,000 mortgage, and I make X amount per month, but I'm not saving a lot. I'm not making a lot of money, and then I vote for Trump. That's voting. I'm good. Sorry, I'm going to probably get some flack for this, but I kind of feel that's voting against myself. Voting for Trump, a billionaire, white guy, successful from New York City. So why would I vote against myself?
Well, because that's a great question, because I think what happens with Trump is you believe that he's going to be a tough guy on ISIS. He's going to protect us. We need somebody who's very tough-minded. We need someone who's going to tell all the politicians to get lost. That's how he campaigned. Now, of course, he just seems to be very one-sided to the right. But you voted for him because you wanted a shake-up. You wanted to change the dynamic in Washington. You wanted a different kind of person, and he is different. I get that. And I get that a lot of people who are working hard and not really going far in life today, they're the blue-collar workers of today. They're frustrated and they're agitated because they don't see themselves getting ahead. So they vote for a different type of person. That's not crazy. That's not being an oddball. However, what we have now is someone who is extremely unstable, and he's not going to be looking out for the interests of those blue-collar people and those folks who are making $40,000, $50,000, maybe even $100,000. They're not going to get any significant tax breaks. They're going to have problems with their health insurance. Where are they going in life with Donald Trump? And he's making all of these statements about opiate addiction and mental health, but he's going the other way. He's actually hurting the cause of mental health and people with addiction problems. He doesn't really make any good sense. He says one thing and does 180 degrees the opposite. That's going to come back to haunt him with the average voter, the really good guy who looked at him and voted for him.
Okay. All right. All right. So we'll give you a chance to make some history here, or not. Right? Are you predicting a Trump implosion? And if you do, what's going to trip it up, and what does it look like? Go.
I think there's going to be a major problem going forward. I think Trump will falter. He may have to resign, because this Russia investigation, in my view, may very well show that he has money from Russia. Maybe it's through the Deutsche Bank, maybe it's through a Saudi bank, but he and his enterprises has money from Russia. That's a real problem. Money from our longtime adversary, our enemy. He's a compromised president, probably in the eyes of many Republicans, if that happens. And if there's money that got into the election from Russia to put up ads against Hillary Clinton, and if people in his campaign, like Lewandowski and Manafort, if they colluded with the Russians to rig the election, it all comes down on Trump, and it all comes down very hard on him, where he's not going to be able to go forward. And that's what I see as possible going forward. I say it's very likely. And I see Trump hiding something. I can see in his mannerisms that he is afraid of this Russia investigation.
All right. So these are some pretty bold statements. So this obviously will be recorded. This will be public. So if this does indeed happen, you're going to look even more like a rock star than you are. We're going to be wrapping up soon, but there's a lot on the media talking about mannerisms in terms of him trying to hold his wife's hand. She seems to be resistant at times, or at times he took her hand and patted it. I know you don't have them in front of you, but have you seen some of these videos, and what's your take on their relationship and their mannerisms together?
Well, I'm actually not too critical of Donald Trump, President Trump, on the handshake thing, or holding hands with his wife. I think that maybe Trump's wife wants to be her own boss herself, and she wants to be independent. I think he could show more affection. There are times when he seems to be walking away from her. I think the optics might not be good. He could probably work on that. But I think you have two pretty independent-minded people here. He could be looking a little better in that regard. I think his handshake thing, though, with other world leaders is especially interesting. I wouldn't blow it out of proportion either, but he tries to grab the hand of the other leader and bring the hand towards him so that the person comes in his direction and he remains the boss and the guy in control. And I see that as really kind of shallow. I wouldn't overdo it. I mean, it's like the kid on the in the playground that tries to be a little bit bully-like, and that gets old pretty quick. I think you see a lot of people now ready for that type of handshake, and they're prepared for it.
Got it. All right. So whether you're listening in on iTunes, Google Play, or seeing us on the newtheory.com website, we will have links to Dr. Rossi's site, brossi.us. That is brossi.us. Dr. Rossi is a regular contributor to New Theory. He's like family. We may not always agree on all points, but we always respect each other's opinion. So, Dr. Rossi, thanks for being on today, and any parting thoughts?
No, I think your questions were right on the mark. Once again, Tom, great.
Thanks, buddy, and we'll talk very soon.